Hey everyone, my name is Nic Snowden, and I'm super excited to be sharing my data overview with you all. I'll be working from a school called Herschel Jones Middle School within the 8th grade department. This presentation is not necessarily the school I work at. My wife teaches special ed interrelated math at this school, and because I'm not currently at a school, I'm using her school to use this data to give me some clarity and to be able to present this data to a math team. So the purpose of this presentation, first of all, we want to look at the demographic changes over the last 3 years. We want to evaluate how things have changed, how things have maybe been the same, things of that nature, and that really planning to affect how that affects our achievement gaps over time. Secondly, we want to look at, like I said, the achievement gaps, those changes in math, particularly within the Georgia Milestones at Herschel Jones Middle School over the years. And then lastly, I want to identify strengths and weaknesses within the current math instruction at Herschel Jones Middle School and find ways to make it either better or continue to keep it the same. Some questions to consider while reviewing this math data. As we said, what are the current strengths and weaknesses? What instructional adjustments can teachers do to make sure all students are receiving the best math education? I think this question is going to be something that we review back at the end, but it's something that is super necessary to ask yourself, not only yearly, but as often as possible to be able to help kids have the best education. How can the math department use short-term data to effectively evaluate their progress? And then lastly, are there any groups of students who are not succeeding in math that we can particularly make changes to try to help them? So an overview of this school at Herschel Jones Middle School. This school is located in Paulding County, Georgia. It is in the heart of Dallas, and roughly each year you can see at the bottom it's got low numbers around 800 to the high 700 numbers of students. Each year from 2019 to 2021 it has gradually increased. The highest number of students that the school has is Caucasian or white students. It has gradually increased each year except for the last year, and then African American students follow that number as that number has increased each year as well. And then you can see down below Hispanic students, and then 2 or more races follow that behind it. This is simply, This is simply a graph of that same data we just looked at, just a lot more years included. If you're looking at these years right here to the right, 2021, 2020, and 2019, you can see where the white race has been the majority. African American has been the second. But over time, even I put these years all the way going back to the late 80s, just showing how it has increased year by year. And the trend is growing in the sense that African American students are going to become the majority if these trends were to keep up year to year. So that's something interesting to look at when discussing the demographics. Going further into demographics of Herschel Jones Middle School, male students and female students, you can see the percentages there on the left. On the right is the simple graph representation of it, but it just fluctuates. It's fairly even, almost 50-50 if you will. But female students, yes, female students, there are more female students than there are male students at Herschel Jones. Continuing to look at the school, how many full-time teachers do they have each year? That stays around that number of 50. That student-teacher ratio stays fairly same, but it's gotten a little bit higher each year as there's been more people move into the city and move into the county. And then that free and reduced lunch, that kind of fluctuates, as you can see, year to year. It's still a high number compared to a lot of schools, living in that high 50s to 60% of students that are receiving that kind of gives you an idea of the student population. And then that mobility rate is listed there as well. This is another, just finishing off the overview of the school, just looking at the last year of 2021, kind of gives us a rough idea of the milestones, if you will, but more so just looking at different subgroups, different types of students within these different types of wide range of content areas, the different types of learners there are, participation rates, and then lastly, achievement rates as well. You can see, particularly in the beginning, all students, there's a high achievement rate within social studies. That's the thing that stood out to me the most. Math is one of the lowest, just particularly over the whole course of the middle school. When looking at that second set of numbers within the economically disadvantaged students, we see that math is actually right behind English within participation, but in terms of distinguished learners, it's the lowest amount of learners, and that's something to even dive into even more. And then just looking at English learners and students with disabilities, there's even more stats to look at that are interesting to see within math, specifically students with disabilities. It's it's not bad, but even that all those categories together, you'd love to have that participation rate higher. So looking at just some of the data when looking at math milestones in particular, I'm going to look at the last 2 years that are presented, and it's broken down by ethnicity and race within these subgroups. You can see right here that the Black or African American students, there's 170 being tested from the second year, and then the first year there's 270 students. So that's a dramatic drop off in number. And you see the developing learners, right? That's a high number for these students, but it's that proficient is what really strikes me at that 12.9%. That's something that's something that you want to try to increase over time. And as you can tell from that 2018, 2019 year to the next following year, 2020, 2021, it decreased. It did. In proficient learners, developing learners, and even distinguished learners as well. Within the white race, that number being tested went down as well, but the numbers seem to increase somewhat for the beginning learners and developing learners. And the proficient learners, it went down, and distinguished learners as well, and that's something even more to dive into. When looking at the two or more races, you can see those numbers there listed as well. I won't go into super detail, but it's just interesting to see how there's a constant theme of within proficient and developing learners, sometimes that number is like going down year to year, and it's interesting to say the least. This is simply a graph representing that table we just saw, just a little more clarity. You can see how that developing learners within the African American community, has gone down, and then with all of them, to be blunt, has gone down. Besides beginning learners, and that's something that has increased each year when looking at the math milestones year to year. When looking at the student achievement over time within 8th grade overall, this gives us more years than we need, but just gives us a general idea of where these students are coming from. So when you're looking at the blue line on this graph, this tells us Herschel Jones Middle School. The green looks at Paulding County as a county-wide district level, and then red is the state of Georgia in general. Now, the only thing about this that grabs my attention is the fact that Herschel Jones is significantly lower than the county and state level year to year. We skip over 2020, but even looking at 2019, 2018, it is not where you want it to be compared to the county. Now, the flip side is from 2018 to the present, there have been gradual strides of the percentages of students meeting these standards. Starting in 2018, following to 2019 to 2021, it goes from about 16% to 20% here to about 23, 24% each year. So even though it's gradual strides, it is strides, and it's something to be, proud of as students are doing their best. With that being said, the county has kind of remained stagnant, and even the state level has somewhat dropped down as well each year. So when we're looking at our data overall, we just want to analyze, okay, what are some of those strengths? As I mentioned, there's gradual increase of the percentage of students meeting those standards each year, which is good. Within the last year of achievement rate, within the last year, the achievement rate has been at least 50% among math students within their milestones. And that's something to be proud of as well. And then lastly, English learners in mathematics has one of the highest participation rates of all the content areas that it has to offer, which is something to be proud of as well. Weaknesses, that's something we can work on. Within the math department in 8th grade, students have been testing significantly lower than the county and state level as I mentioned. The percentage of distinguished and proficient learners within math has decreased each year. And then lastly, economically disadvantaged students within math have more of a hard time becoming proficient and distinguished learners. Some discussion questions just to think about. How does needs-based instruction time used within the first period of the school day help students within math? This is a period that is built in by the county for students just to simply work on things that they need help with, an extra study hall, if you will, but more so focusing truly on their needs and what makes them a better student. What ways can teachers use general instruction to lower the achievement gaps in student performance? How can they change their instructional strategies? How can they relate to students culturally and responsively to be able to help them grow, things of that nature. And then lastly, how can we evaluate and learn from other schools in the county as they are doing tremendously better than the state and us as well. Lastly, next step, we just want to discuss observations, strengths and weaknesses, and possible causes of current achievement gaps in content area terms and grade level verbiage. We want to take a deeper look at the school improvement plan in order to help close that gap of achievement for students among different ethnicities and backgrounds. And then we want to incorporate more instructional strategies, as I mentioned, to engage with students culturally and technologically throughout the math department. Here are some of my URLs and sources listed. And that is all for myself at Herschel Jones Middle School. I hope I was super clear. I hope I was super helpful for you all. Let's make change. Let's make impact today, and let's not wait at all. Thank you. Have a good day.